Today, I will be discussing my topic of the Crimean War. The Crimean War took place in Europe between the years 1853 and 1856. This war was relatively short for Europe, as just 2 centuries prior, the 30-Year War had taken place, destroying major parts of Europe. This war was fought on the Crimean Peninsula, which was the site of the weakened Ottoman Empire. As you can see from the map here, the Crimean Peninsula sits in the Black Sea and borders Ukraine and Russia. In the Crimean War, there were 5 empires or kingdoms involved. These empires will be introduced in the next slide. It is estimated that over 650,000 individuals lost their life during the war. The war was also another example in Europe of the East versus West. This theme would not end, and we would see this East versus West theme in subsequent world wars. Finally, the Crimean War featured most major religions in Europe. Like said in the previous slide, there were 5 kingdoms or empires involved in the Crimean War. 4 of these empires were aligned together. They were the Kingdom of Sardinia, France, the Ottoman Empire, and the United Kingdom. These 4 nations opposed Russia. I want to note that in this video, I will be referring to the Ottoman Empire as also the Turks. There were multiple factors that brought these 5 nations to war. At this time, the Ottoman Empire was becoming weak and disjointed. Russia understood this, and they attempted a land grab of Ottoman Empire territory. At the time, Russian Tsar Nicholas I was desperate in his attempt to expand his power and interest in Europe. Additionally, the Ottoman Empire occupied significant religious territory. It sat at Jerusalem, which pretty much every major religion has some type of religious significant event or temple there. The Ottoman Empire was Muslim, and they occupied Jerusalem. Russia and Tsar Nicholas I wanted access for Eastern Orthodox to Jerusalem and other religious sites. He wanted a guarantee of their safety, and he wanted Eastern Orthodox individuals in the Ottoman Empire under his control. Furthermore, he wanted to protect Eastern Orthodox individuals in Palestine. He sent Eastern Orthodox monks to the Ottoman Empire. They were killed by troops. This brought Russia to a war footing. France and Europe at the same time wanted to protect their own religious interests in the area, but they especially wanted to maintain a balance of power and protect trade in the region. For these factors and the hostility and land grab of Russia towards the Ottoman Empire, the Crimean War began in 1853. While there was attempts at diplomacy, they failed. The war initially began when Tsar Nicholas I sent 80,000 troops to occupy Moldavia and Wallachia. These were areas that were under Ottoman Empire control. Initially, the Ottoman Empire was outnumbered by Russian forces. The Turks suffered massive defeats initially. Thousands of people were slaughtered in the city of Sinop. At this battle, the Russian army committed numerous atrocities. These atrocities were widely publicized in other European countries, and that helped gain support in both France and the United Kingdom to enter the war in 1854 to protect both the Ottoman Empire and their trade routes. Both the British and the French had similar goals, but there were some main differences. For the British, they really wanted to maintain trade with the Ottoman Empire and protect trade routes to India. On the other hand, the French wanted revenge for Napoleon's defeat. The English and French began deploying forces to the region, which ramped up the war. This began when 60,000 British and French troops were deployed to Istanbul, which was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. These forces marched to the Russian-controlled city of Sevastopol, which was one of the most crucial battles of the war. This war would last for over a year, and it will be discussed in the next slide. Another battle during the war was the Battle of Balkovia. This featured displays of British bravery. Initially, it appeared that the British would be beaten. However, they beat back the Russian army, and then they pursued them into the terrain. Unfortunately, their victory was overshadowed by a military blunder where they went into a valley and were surrounded from three sides, and suffered significant losses. The Russians were able to sit up on ridges and pick off the British one by one. Another battle during the war was the Battle of Inkerman. This was a surprise attack by the Russians. However, this surprise attack failed as they were significantly outnumbered and there were big losses for the Russians. At the beginning of the war, the British and French were on a roll. Unfortunately, the winter of 1854 and 1855 struck. This was an especially harsh winter that was a nightmare for the Brits. A massive storm hit Crimea on November 14, 1854. Many British tents were destroyed and troops were left outside in the cold. In total, the British had 30 naval ships lost or damaged in the storm. This destroyed precious supplies, which led to a treacherous, deadly winter for the British. Like noted previously in the video, the Siege of Sevastopol was the most important battle in the Crimean War. This battle was 11 months and lasted from October 1854 to September 1855. Sevastopol was significant because of the home of Russia's Black Sea naval fleet, which was very powerful. During the siege, the Allied countries had 6 bombardments of Sevastopol, which location you can see on the top right of the screen. The Russian army became overwhelmed by the final bombardment and withdrew their field army. This began to mark the end of the war. Right before the city was captured, the Russians sank most of their remaining ships. This completely marked the end of the war as the Allied nations forced the surrender of Russia on September 11, 1855, after the French raised the French flag over the city. This officially marked the end of the war. At the end of the Siege of Sevastopol, the Allied losses totaled over 128,000, while the Russian losses were 102,000. This was the most deadly sight during the war and the most significant battle. After the loss of Sevastopol, the Russians realized their time was up. However, the French and British still lacked real interest in the region other than Russian deterrence and protecting trade routes. This meant that they were ready to come to the table to talk about peace. At the same time, British and French public opinion had turned against the war. This furthermore allowed the sides to be ready for peace. At the end of the war, the losses were significant. Both countries had lost over 500,000 soldiers. However, most of these losses weren't on the battlefield. Over half of these losses were suffered because of illness and disease. Peace talks for the Crimean War happened in Paris. It was known as the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris had multiple stipulations. The first was that Russia had to give the land back that it captured to the Ottoman Empire. Additionally, Russia would regain the land they lost to the French and British. This included the city of Sevastopol. Furthermore, Russian warships were banned from the Black Sea, which was significant because they had no military presence. This also allowed trade to return to the Black Sea. Even after the war and after victory, the Ottoman Empire was still weak, and Europe was prepared for the collapse. The treaty was officially signed on March 30th, 1856, and marked the end of the war. The Crimean War had the most significant effect on Russia. The first effect was on the military. The war exposed how poorly equipped the Russian army was and how it needed to modernize. It could no longer rely on just having a large army. This led to military reforms being introduced, and for the Russian army, the loss was huge as they lost prestige and influence throughout Europe. Furthermore, Russia suffered economic loss. It placed significant economic strain on Russia, and Russia was still agrarian, and the war made them realize that their future was industrial. The final effect of the war was social change. Russia still had serfdom, which is where peasants are forced to work for a lord. This had been phased out of the rest of Europe. And The Emancipation Reform of 1861 ended serfdom, and many point to the Crimean War as causing this and forcing this to occur. Finally, the Crimean War left a significant legacy. It is known as the first conflict to feature modern technology. For the first time, soldiers used mass-produced weapons, and they had military shells, which became part of their arsenal. This type of warfare would continue to occur well into the First World War. Additionally, photography was extensively used. This allowed people back at home to be able to see what was happening during the war, and also allowed for records to be taken. Furthermore, the British and French used the invention of the telegraph, which forever altered communication and improved their war strategy. They used electrical signals to transmit Morse code, allowing communication to occur from the front lines to back home. Finally, railroads were built for the war, which allowed supplies to easily be transported. While all of these technological advancements were important, the most important was the advancement to wartime medicine. During the war, significant losses occurred because of illness and disease. This forced countries to improve wartime medicine. Medicine was professionalized across Europe, and nurses would become a significant part of the military from now on. The losses from illness and disease would not occur. This was in part due to Florence Nightingale, who was the founder of founder of modern nursing, who led British nurses during the Crimean War. These advancements in technology would remain key for warfare in the coming years. Thank you for listening to my talk on the Crimean War.